address just made. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Gabon so that he can present an address from the head of state.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I have the honour of introducing the pre-recorded statement given by His Excellency Ali Bongo Ondimba, President of the Gabonese Republic, head of state, at the General Debate of the 75th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Mr. President, Majesties, Heads of State and Government, Heads of Delegation, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, allow me at the outset to convey to you my warmest congratulations on your successful election to the presidency of the 75th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Your election is a powerful testament of your country's stellar diplomatic reputation around the globe and is a symbol of the esteem in which you are held by the international community. I can assure you of the full support of Gabon as you discharge your mandate. I wish to hail the work done by your predecessor, Professor Tijani Mohamed Bandi, who, in a particularly difficult health crisis, was able to rally the efforts of the states within the United Nations to successfully steer our work. I also wish to convey my deepest appreciation to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for the extent of the work that he has carried out to render our organisation more effective, and I wish to commend him for his commitment to implementing the courageous structural reforms upon which the UN has embarked. Mr. President, the world stands today at a turning point in its history. Indeed, we are in the midst of an unprecedented health crisis, which is destroying the very edifices of our societies. This crisis is taking its toll on each and every nation. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the political, security, and socio-economic challenges which our states are regularly called upon to face. We must learn the lessons of this multifaceted crisis. First of all, the crisis has forced us to acknowledge that our fates are intertwined in the face of any threat against the chain of humankind. We are all links in this chain. This fact reminds us that the only path out of this crisis is multilateralism and increased international solidarity. It was cognizant of this reality that the founding fathers of our organisation shaped the conceptual cornerstone which lies at the heart of the United Nations Charter, and that is collective security. Something else which has become patently clear in the midst of this crisis is the fact that a legal framework is not enough. It cannot alone face the global challenges that our world is called upon to resolve. We must reinvent ourselves and take more effective action to contain the transnational and cross-border threats that face us, such as the current pandemic. At a time when this House of Nations is marking the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, our common house, we must nobly embody the values and ideals which prompted and guided its creation. I wish here to commend the important declaration adopted at the celebration to mark the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. This declaration reflects the enormity of the work we must complete and enshrines the commitments that we must undertake and outlines what we must do to ensure that no one is left behind. Mr. President, the theme of our work during this session is particularly relevant and timely. Indeed, the future we want, the UN we need, reaffirming our collective commitment to multilateralism, is an unequivocal phrase. This is strong language which piques our collective conscience. Indeed, acting alone, nations cannot be spared from climate change, tensions sparked by trade wars, from the rising tide of inequality, or from the proliferation of terrorist attacks and transnational crime. The world in which we're living today, consequently, requires a multilateral system which champions cooperation for the benefit of all and which sees us pool our efforts. On that note, reforming the UN Security Council so as to ensure it is equitably representable and boasts improved working methods is a need, if not a critical need, that we must answer. Through me, Gabon is profoundly committed to the common African position as enshrined in the Eswini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. In addition to more international solidarity, and in addition to ushering in this Security Council reform, we must revitalise the work of the General Assembly and embark upon the reform of the UN's Economic and Social Council. Such reforms must be completed in order to lend new momentum to our organisation. Mr. President, creating the UN we need also involves reshaping the missions entrusted to the Bretton Woods institutions in order to make these institutions true catalysts of growth and development at a global level. These reforms are vital if we are to usher in a fairer international order which best champions the interests of all of us, because doing just that will have an impact on the achievement of the SDGs in Agenda 2030 and will meet the legitimate aspirations of the African people as enshrined in Agenda 2063. Mr. President, the United Nations has a natural vocation to come to the aid of the world's people when their aspirations for dignity, peace and prosperity are under threat. The United Nations must also provide a response for humankind to supposedly inevitable, painful suffering and injustice. The call to action on the part of a fairer and more equitable multilateral system will lead to the stabilisation of commodity prices that are currently subject to excessive speculation. Indeed, we must rid the market of that speculation because it sows instability, which makes it impossible for countries to predict how many resources they can mobilise. Our countries need to have that predictability in order to realise their development goals. It would be fairer to pay countries a fair price for their natural resources. That would render the global order also more equitable. Ushering in the future that we wish to see means that we must uphold our commitments. Here, therefore, I wish to state that we must indeed uphold commitments made to developing countries. This holds true whether we're talking about the transfer of clean technology or improving the access to renewable energy. Indeed, what we need to do is expedite the transition of all countries from a traditionally heavily polluting industry to a carbon-free industry which preserves the environment. For Gabon, such an energy transition is based on three pillars: improving living standards, the implementation of climate change adaptation projects, and the preservation of biodiversity. Mr. President, no development can be sustainable without peace, and there can be or security or stability, and one of these cannot be achieved without the other two. However, unfortunately, these foundations continue to be shaken in several regions of the world. Recurring terrorist attacks make it clear that no nation has been spared this threat. Consequently, our response to this threat must be based on candid cooperation, locally, nationally, regionally, and globally. Of course, through me, Gabon stands shoulder to shoulder with the international community in condemning terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and extends its support to the countries and peoples that have fallen victim to this scourge. Mr. President, the cost of instability arising from the effects of terrorism, hotbeds of tension, and various forms of instability is particularly high for many African countries. Indeed, these nations find themselves obliged to devote huge resources to fighting the above phenomena. These phenomena are fueled by, for example, the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons, and the illicit trafficking of wild flora and fauna. It goes without saying for me that fighting such sources of instability in several regions across our continent, we need to stand shoulder to shoulder and tackle the threats at a global level, because any threat against any nation is a threat against all of us. In this regard, we remain firmly committed to the work of the United Nations, to the work of the African Union, and to that of the Economic Community of Central African States. We're committed to standing alongside these institutions to work for the promotion of stability and peace in our states. Mr. President, at a regional level, my peers have entrusted me with the task of spearheading the institutional reform of ECAS, the Economic Community of Central African States, that is, to make it more efficient and better able to meet the challenges that it was created to meet, namely those linked to regional integration and development. On the 28th of July 2020, the ECAS Conference of Heads of State and Government adopted a new institutional framework which is more dynamic and better able to meet its goals. And this in order to respond to the major challenges of our time: peace, security and development. Indeed, the revised Treaty of ECAS entered into force on the 28th of August 2020, and the ECAS Commission is the new executive body of this organisation, and it entered existence on the 31st of August 2020, after all of its members had taken an oath. During its 17th regular summit, ECAS also adopted a community action plan to implement United Nations Resolution 1325 and for the implementation of a community strategy to respond to COVID-19. At this summit, ECAS also harmonized rules and regulations pertaining to telecommunications, ITCs, cyber security, and cross-border integration. Mr. President, domestically, like many countries, Gabon has suffered the effects of plummeting commodity prices. This fall in prices has been exacerbated by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. This situation overall has seen economy slow down. Against this backdrop, my country continued with reforms already underway to correct imbalances through recovery measures. These involve making budgetary adjustments, developing infrastructure, and promoting the private sector as a lever that can help us diversify and transform our economies. Today, we can be proud of the encouraging signs emerging following the implementation of our economic recovery plan. Indeed, Thanks to the return to growth we're seeing as a result of the aforementioned reforms, Gabon is slowly reclaiming greater room for maneuver economically. Such room for maneuver is necessary to finance the most urgent investments, namely in healthcare, education, training, employment and infrastructure. Mr. President, inclusion is a major concern and indeed one of the guiding lights of my country's political agenda. Indeed, promoting the inclusion of all in our society was the very raison d'être of the equal opportunities policy that I have championed. This policy seeks to create proper space for young people, women, and the most vulnerable among us to ensure that no one is left behind in my country's development. As part of this process, I recently appointed a woman to the office of Prime Minister, Head of Government. As a result of this recent appointment, we have 3 highly qualified women, among many others, in the 3 most senior positions in our state. We have a woman at the helm of the Constitutional Court, the Senate, and the lower chamber of government. These women provide invaluable support as we seek to consolidate our democratic gains and as we seek to move along the path of progress. Mr. President, the future that we want and the UN we need will remain nothing more than dead letter for as long as many peoples across the world and many individuals remain at the mercy of unfair and often unjust sanctions. In this regard, I call solemnly for the complete lifting of the embargo which has affected Cuba for several decades. This embargo must be lifted to allow the country to achieve sustainable development. I wish to close my statement by reaffirming Gabon's commitment to multilateralism. Indeed, it's the only legitimate path that we can follow if we wish to build a future of trust and bolster our common ambition to build an organisation able to meet the needs of sustainable development. We need indeed to build an organisation which finds appropriate and lasting solutions to the threats facing humankind. Thank you.
En nombre de la Asamblea General.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Gabonese Republic for the statement he has just issued.